I'm Bob Bordas. I'm John Green. I'm Matt Young. And you're watching Crash Course AP US History. Like any good war, the Civil War started. We're going to tell you why it started. One of the biggest reasons for the Civil War is the Compromise of 1850. This had many parts to it. It was proposed by Henry Clay in 1850, obviously. One of the major parts was it entered California into the Union as a free state. This was controversial because it went against the Missouri Compromise line, as half the state was north of the line, but half of it was south. Another major part of the Compromise of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Law. Fugitive slave law already exists before this, but the Compromise of 1850 strengthened it greatly. The Fugitive Slave Law cracked down on escaped slaves. Many slaves who had escaped were tracked down and brought back to their masters against their will. All of these parts of the Compromise of 1850 made it a major cause of the Civil War. Another major cause of the Civil War was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854. This essentially completely overrode the Missouri Compromise of 1820 by letting Kansas and Nebraska have popular sovereignty instead of making them free or slave because of their location in relation to the 36-30 line. This act was very controversial because of the nature of the decision. Basically, the government just changed their mind and contradicted themselves completely. This didn't make people very happy, as you could probably guess.
Uncle Tom's Cabin was a novel by Harriet Beecher Stowe about slaves in Kentucky. It was published in 1852, and it caused even more sectionalism between the North and the South. Because the book humanized the slaves more than any piece of literature to date, it became so controversial that the majority of states in the South banned the book. Another reason for the war was the election of 1860. Northern Republican Lincoln beat Democratic Stephen Douglas, despite only getting 39% of the popular vote. Lincoln won 0 Southern states. However, he was still able to win the election, and that made the South very mad. The South promptly expressed their discontent, and South Carolina promptly started up their secession train. The rest of the Southern states followed.
The Lincoln-Douglas debates were a series of 7 debates between Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. That's Stephen Douglas, the troll, when they were running for president, and that happened in 1858. And Lincoln was better because he won. Then the Freeport Doctrine was something that Douglas proposed during the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. And he said slavery could be prevented from any territory quite simply. People in the territory, if they didn't want slavery, they just don't vote for things that support slavery. But if they did want slavery, just vote for things that do want slavery. It's easy. Easy as pie.
The fight between Brooks and Sumner really highlighted the sectionalism that was growing between the two areas of the country. 2 congressmen, Preston Brooks from South Carolina and Charles Sumner from Massachusetts, got into a physical confrontation after Sumner made a very emotional speech attacking slavery. Brooks expressed his discontent, and it went downhill to the point of Sumner insulting a relative of Brooks. Sumner ended up being caned violently by Brooks. Most violent caning in U.S. congressional history. True fact.
So in 1846, David Wilmot proposed the Wilmot Proviso, in which he said that Americans would ban slavery in the Western Territory that was acquired from Mexico in the Mexican War. Harper's Ferry was the place where John Brown tried to incite a slave revolt. It wasn't a success because he went to the armory and took all the guns and stuff, and he was banking on the slaves coming and taking in guns and distributing the guns to the slaves and helping them kill their masters or whatever and revolt. That didn't happen for whatever reason. So yeah, him and all of his sons died.
In the Underground Railroad, a bunch of people in the South who owned land offered up their homes and businesses for the fugitive slaves to have a place to stay. These places were called stations, and the people who helped guide the slaves were called conductors. One of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad was Harriet Tubman. She led over 300 slaves to freedom on over 19 separate trips. Riveting.